Hi, Dan Verton here, Executive Editor with MeriTalk. I'm at the Akamai Government Forum today in Washington, D.C., and I'm speaking with Mr. Rusty Pickens. Rusty is the Senior Advisor for Digital Platforms at the Department of State. Rusty, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Dan. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, let's just start out. Give me an idea of what you do at the State Department, what an advisor for digital platforms does.
Sure, definitely. So I work in the team called IIP, International Information Programs, and we are sort of really leaning forward on the public diplomacy side of the world, doing lots of cloud computing. So everything from embassy websites to productivity tools to my project, which is CRM and sort of bulk messaging to foreign audiences. But the advisory aspect is really just sort of jack of all trades. How do we help the government do better in the digital space and like use these modern tools that we're having trouble adopting in some areas, and like the government's lagging behind a little bit. So the team that I'm working with, most of us are ex-White House people, so we've kind of been there, done that in an agency that's a little more risk tolerant, and trying to do it in larger agencies, sort of make it more systemic, institutionalized there, and really sort of up our game a little bit in terms of just IT and technology infrastructure state of the environment, really.
Right. Well, digital diplomacy has really come a long way since I can remember when it first started in terms of the internet. Now you must really rely on that digital capability a lot more than putting people on the ground in far-flung places around the world.
Yeah, definitely. So sort of job number one for us is establishing relationships with people, and the president has a good line about this where we don't just have relationships with governments, we have relationships with individuals, right? And so if you can reach someone by a text message or an email right on their phone, the amount of ground that you can cover is so much larger than the old school sort of diplomacy and cables and faxes and letters, right? So we have all these new tools at our disposal, and we're sort of trying to bring that together. The things that we're working on right now, though, are sort of the agency and the federal space moving from the on-premise mentality and like how do we, just do traditional email and stuff like that, sort of like safeguarded contact management behind a firewall somewhere, to really let's put this in the cloud, let's make it mobile first, enable staff to be able to do things away from their desk out in the field, and then tie all that stuff together. So we've done a really good job of like, being able to have our contacts on the one hand, and then the other end of the spectrum is things like Facebook, Twitter, where we're doing lots of like, FISMA low, publicly available information way out on the social space, sort of broadcast stuff. But we're catching up a little bit in the middle of like, how do we establish those relationships a little better? How do we make sure, we know what this person is interested in and how they're interacting with the State Department? And the name of our game is like promoting American values overseas, right? So any amount of content we can deliver, a little more personal, a little more targeted, that's what we're really working on in cloud computing.
How far along would you say you are in moving all these different capabilities to the cloud?
So varying levels across the different platforms, right? So the teams that I'm working with, and part of what I hope to speak to later at the conference, is the biggest project and sort of the one that's the farthest ahead is a sister team to my group, the embassy website. So every embassy has their own website out there. Some of them are a little hit or miss in terms of infrastructure, so centralizing all that, bringing it into one place, having a consistent sort of platform people can work on, and then really teaching and training the embassy folks like how to make great content and put that into the vehicle, right? So that one's really far out there. It's in good shape. They're probably about halfway through now, I think, of rolling all the posts into the system. On the other hand, we're doing lots of digital productivity tools, so like email and instant messaging, Slack, for example, some of that stuff that's new to the industry.
Interesting.
Really helping on the collaboration side. And then the project that I'm helping lead now is the CRM stuff and the bulk email sort of in the middle that ties all that stuff together. So we're just getting started on that front. I'd say we're probably 10% in. It's very early, nascent pilot stages. But the tools are out there. We're just sort of refactoring them and integrating them in the State Department environment with the federal rules and regulations around all.
So that's a good transition there, because we can't talk about cloud without talking about security, right? So the theme of this year's forum, Akamai Government Forum, is safeguarding a dynamic government. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on, where do you even begin, given the increasing complexity of the threats, digital threats, and the complexity of the infrastructures you're
Yeah.
trying to manage. Where do
Yeah.
you even start to begin a security program?
Yeah, sure. So it's a huge challenge. I'll just offer that right up front. And the government is really, really large, and we have billions of dollars invested in IT. And so my background from the older days was IT operations on premise, running bare metal servers and email and all that stuff. The world has just changed drastically, and I mean IT rolls over every 3 years anyway, right? But the federal government now has so much stuff out there, and trying to tie all that together is a really big challenge, right? So. Thinking back to the early days of President Obama's administration, like appointing a federal CIO, standing up a cloud computing advisory board, which I helped inform process for, that became FedRAMP, right? So we're getting some of these things in places now that help a lot in terms of like what can you sort of just go get off the shelf in terms of cloud computing that we know is going to be protected with all the
Right.
federal regulations and the background checks and the data centers that are in the lower 48 and all those sort of things that we need as a government to trust that our data is okay and secure. But we've still got a long way to go. And as you were saying, like things like Heartbleed's a good example, right? A patch that was issued and a vulnerability that was found, and we sort of all had to scramble as a government there and regroup on it and try to get it fixed in 36 hours. I think it was a really
Right.
quick turnaround.
Right.
Stuff like that's only going to happen more frequently, and it's going to be probably a larger impact, and it's going to be quicker turnaround. So things like working with Akamai and some of the other vendors, like what I've seen personally is the government's struggling to keep up a little bit, right? And so you have these really big IT contracts. They were factored for many option years, many millions of dollars, 5 or 6 years of contract options out there. On-premise focused, definitely software development world of waterfall and PMLC, right? So the older school kind of way of doing things. So trying to shift all that to modular contracting and agile software development and security services that are 365, 24/7, right? That can help you with this stuff. What I'm seeing personally is vendors out in the private sector, if you can partner with the right ones and establish the right sort of safety net or support contract, if you will, they do so much better on security and operations than the government would be if you were trying to do that in-house or on an older contract, right? So we're trying to refactor most of that. And my big takeaway is oftentimes there's not a really good reason you're running this thing on-prem. Like really think about it. Can you put it in the cloud? Can you put it in the hands of one of the industry-leading cloud providers that can take really good care of this stuff? Because frankly, at the end of the day, their business is built on keeping the system online so you can use it and keeping your data secure.
Right.
And some of them have had, very few breaches over the years. And if you've been watching the news, like government, we're just constantly under attack, and there are all these vulnerabilities, and it's really hard to keep up.
Well, people like to see their server. They like to see that red blinking light, right?
Yeah.
Know it's there.
Yeah, it's mine.
So this is probably the toughest question you're going to get. When you think about cybersecurity in government, if there's one thing you can absolutely get tomorrow, would it be technology, people, budget? What is it?
Sure. So I think kind of an all of the above approach, right? The technology side, I think, is less important. So the industry is there. They have the tools to do this stuff. We've got to get it adapted to the federal government. I think what's missing right now is two really key things. And some of my partners from back on the White House side and on the contracting side of the world now are trying to help us with things like the tech FAR. So how do you award technology like cloud-friendly contracts? Because my job as an IT professional, I can't be successful if the contract was written improperly or not managed right. So we're sort of, to me, that's problem number one, is like get the acquisition side squared away. So U.S. Digital Service, my good friend Tracy Walker, is like leading the charge on raising a generation of digital contracting officers out there. So that's step one, is just get the contracts in place, get access to the right technology. The second step that's missing is, I think, a thing that we're all going to have to do federal-wide as digital leaders and technologists, institutionalizing those skill sets, right? So you're seeing political campaigns and nonprofits and private sectors just moving really fast. The startup mentality is really great out there. Bringing those skills into government and training, educating, mentoring, raising the civil service, who are sort of the glue that holds all this together, administration to administration, or team
Right.
role over foreign service at the State Department. You know, those folks serve for 2 years and then move on. We've got to deliver that skill set of how do you really run a top-notch digital shop to the civil service and
Right.
teach them how to do it. And some of them are really great. Some of them want to learn. You know, there are lots who have been sort of stuck in the old way of doing older technology or bad contracts, and the aptitude is there. We just got to sort of funnel all that together. But I think skill set, if I could just give you one takeaway, is probably the best thing. Teaching government FTEs how to understand that, the strategy of why you need it, and then being able to, you know, provide
Right.
oversight for these big contracts, because
Right.
I don't think we're ever going to have the manpower to do it from within the government. You know, outsource most of that hands-on work, but you've got to have key, really competent, really good people to oversee that stuff and provide like the technical thought leadership there.
Great
and
advice.
We're catching up on some
Yeah.
of that a little. So.
Good. Well, we've been speaking with Mr. Rusty Pickens. He's the Senior Advisor for Digital Platforms at the Department of State. I'm Dan Verton, Executive Editor for MeriTalk. Rusty, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks very much for watching.